On the night of the 12th of August 2015, just after 11:30 p.m., the port of Tianjin suddenly blew up. The shockwave shattered windows kilometers away and showed up on seismographs as the equivalent of a magnitude 2.3 earthquake. People living in the nearby high-rise apartments were thrown out of bed. Phone cameras captured a huge fireball punching upward. Workers had reported a small fire involving packaging materials 40 minutes earlier in one of the warehouses. But when firefighters who arrived on site tried containing it with water, it escalated the situation beyond control. At 11:34 p.m., the first major blast hit, equivalent to roughly 2.9 tons of TNT, powerful enough to obliterate fire trucks parked close to the flames and kill many of the frontline responders on site. And 30 seconds later, a second much larger detonation followed. This time releasing energy comparable to 21 tons of TNT and producing a giant mushroom of smoke. A 66-meter wide and 14-meter deep crater was carved into the ground at the site. Steel containers were flattened like tin cans as heavy debris flew into the neighborhoods with the force of artillery. But how did the water, usually used to put out the fire, make the situation so much worse? The answer to that was hiding in the warehouse's layout. Turns out materials that should never even share the same space were stacked in the same yard. Powerful oxidizers and bulk nitrocellulose were placed only meters apart. Now, oxidizers are chemicals that don't burn themselves, but can make any fire nearby burn more intensely by giving it more oxygen. And its partner in crime? The nitrocellulose that's usually stable in wet conditions, but is highly flammable in a dried state. Reports show that it had been leaked and dried out that day, leading to ignition, which got overpowered by the oxidizers. And when the firefighters threw water on that fire, it also hit another compound sitting close by, calcium carbide, a highly water-reactive material. That triggered another chemical reaction, producing a highly flammable gas. And lastly, next to the fire were containers of ammonium nitrate, a material that only needs heat and confinement to explode. And that heat came quick when the nitrocellulose and calcium carbide ignited. At the scene, fires continued burning 2 days later, and smaller blasts and reignitions were being reported around the crater. At dawn, the human cost took the entire nation by shock. 173 people, including 104 firefighters and 11 police officers, lost their lives, making it China's deadliest industrial disaster. Public anger pushed Beijing to take direct control of the investigation. The State Council's report confirmed 123 individuals as responsible to varying degrees. Chinese courts later sentenced 49 people, including Ruhai executives, local safety officials, and port administrators, with the case now no longer ongoing. On May 24, 2019, a rooftop spark trapped 22 students in a coaching center in the Indian city of Surat. Within minutes, the top floor of the Takshashila arcade building turned into a trap. Smoke began filling the low-roof classroom. Nobody knew where it was coming from, only that it was suddenly getting harder to breathe. Students did the most obvious thing. They moved toward the door. However, when they opened it, they were met with flames. The only exit they used every day was blocked. Some students tried squeezing out on a narrow ledge 4 stories above the ground. People on the ground shouted up, assuring the teens that they would catch them. But from that height, with bare hands, those makeshift catches were never going to be enough. Reports show that the said coaching rooms were actually an illegally enclosed, roughly 7-foot high dome built on the rooftop of the Takshashila arcade. Inside, dozens of students were packed into low-ceiling spaces, sitting on tires as chairs at wooden desks. Plastic flex banners hung overhead, and several air conditioners ran at the same time. There was only one working stairwell serving those rooftop rooms, and near the top of that stairwell out on the terrace sat an outdoor AC unit and its wiring. Now, under extreme heat, electrical wiring starts to soften, insulation breaks down, and the metal inside can warp or melt. When that happens, the wires can short circuit, spark, or even ignite anything nearby. In this case, the ignitable material was a flex banner close to the AC unit. It caught fire almost instantly, and the flames moved straight to the wood cladding on the stairs, the same stairs that connected the lower floor and the rooftop. Once that timber caught fire, the stairwell basically became a vertical channel carrying heat and smoke upward. Looking at the structure in official reports, we found another very strange detail. There was a second staircase after all, a sturdier one in fact, but as it turned out, it was sealed on both ends. That drastically reduced the students' chances to escape, leaving them with no choice but to stand at the ledge of a 4-story building on fire. High-reach platforms that could reach the rooftop eventually arrived 40 minutes later. That delay was why, even with all the gear and effort, the teens stayed trapped for far too long. Those who jumped, hoping to be caught, hit the ground with full force, while those who stayed inside had inhaled toxic levels of smoke. According to the official reports, by the time rescuers reached the roof, at least 22 students had already died, and around 19 were injured. Police filed a 4,000+ page charge sheet naming the coaching operator, the builders, municipal engineers, and an electricity utility engineer. Though as of 2025, the trial is still not finished, and all the accused remain out on bail. On the 30th of October 2015, just after 10:32 p.m., a free metal concert in Bucharest turned into one of Europe's deadliest club fires. Inside the collective nightclub, the band Goodbye to Gravity had just begun their album release show when a row of sparkler fountains fired up on stage. The next moment, a thin streak of flame appeared on a foam-covered pillar near the stage, reaching the low-rise ceiling and spreading sideways at an uncontrollable speed. People began filming, assuming that it was some sort of stage effect and that it would die down soon. Except it kept growing until burning droplets began to fall from the ceiling toward the crowd. Within seconds, the fire pushed the room into flashover, temperatures near the ceiling climbed past 600 degrees Celsius, and the fire began racing across almost every exposed surface. The crowd of hundreds panicked and rushed towards the only working exit, a narrow 2-part door of which only one half was open. Since everyone tried to reach it at once, the corridor got jammed with people in front falling over and getting trampled. Those still deeper inside the hall could barely breathe as air continued to worsen. Many ducked low to escape the smoke, while others angled toward the walls, hoping there was another exit. Shortly after, firefighters and ambulances arrived, immediately activating the National Red Plan for major incidents. Around 500 responders, 75 vehicles, including at least 11 fire engines, and dozens of ambulances rushed to the site in an hour. People were carried out, treated on the pavement, and hurried to hospitals across Bucharest. Around 26 to 27 of the victims were pronounced dead on site. While another challenge appeared in the hospitals. Romania's burn care capacity was limited, so survivors were spread across several hospitals that were not all equipped to handle complex burns and serious infections. Consequently, the death toll rose to 64, with more people losing their lives to hospital-acquired infections rather than the burns. Amidst that, a shocking fact emerged about the Collective Club. According to City Hall records, Collective was originally licensed as a restaurant bar with 80 seats, when in reality it functioned as a 400+ capacity rock club with standing crowds and live shows. However, that 80-seat label was what kept the venue out of stricter fire safety categories. With no checks, owners not only neglected to keep potential exits open, except for that narrow one, but they even covered the pillars and ceiling with non-fireproof polyurethane acoustic foam. a lightweight plastic that insulates sound, but when it catches fire, it burns very fast, releasing toxic smoke. Criminal investigations led to one of Romania's most closely watched trials, and in May 2022, the Bucharest Court of Appeal issued final sentences on the main collective case. 3 club owners received prison terms of 6 to 11 years, and the representatives of the Sparkler Fountain Company and 2 ISU fire officers also received multi-year sentences. On November 14, 2025, at around 9 p.m., the residents of Aziza heard a deep metallic crack in the sky, followed by a pressure wave that rattled windows. Car alarms went off, and people rushed outside, thinking a plane had gone down near the Buenos Aires airport. Except it wasn't a plane. The sound came from a warehouse inside the Spegazzini industrial hub, run by an agrochemical logistics company called Logischem. What started as a routine warehouse blaze, however, didn't stay that way for long, because the second it reached what was stored inside, the building acted like a giant improvised bomb. The fireball blew outward, sending a plume of black smoke across the district before rapidly spreading. From above, drone footage showed flames had jumped to Logischem's neighbors. Plastics warehouses, tire storage, food logistics, document archives, all of them stacked with things that burn very fast. Within only 1 hour, a cluster of separate businesses had turned into one continuous wall of fire stretching across the park. And inside that wall, around 15 to 20 fire brigades from across the region gathered at the site, trying to carve out any kind of control, aiming water and foam at whatever structures they could still save, desperately trying to stop the flames from fully involving another nearby plant called Flamia, with its own stock of highly flammable materials. Roughly 24 people were reported injured: firefighters, factory workers, residents, and even a pregnant woman ended up in intensive care. Within minutes, the industrial landscape had reduced to twisted steel and ash, leaving victims and investigators questioning just what happened inside that warehouse. The inventory that night included 25,000 kilograms of red phosphorus, 16,000 kilograms of aluminum powder, flammable gases like butane, oxidizers, and toxic pesticides like methyl bromide, all chemicals that should be kept far apart in separate sheds. Yet they were stored dangerously close together in the same place, a mistake we saw in the Tianjin port disaster as well. Red phosphorus and aluminum powder react violently when heated and confined. Gas cylinders near open flames behave like metal grenades in slow motion. As heat surrounds them, the pressure inside rises until the shell either vents or bursts. And to make it all even worse, there were oxidizers, which we already know makes fires burn more intensely by feeding them oxygen. Now put those together in one large building, it was a setup for an explosion, and the only thing that was missing was the spark. And on November 14th, that spark came. Investigators still haven't said what caused that first ignition, whether it was an electric short circuit or equipment failure. But once flames took hold, they had everything they needed. Apart from that fire, it's also strange how quickly it engulfed nearby facilities. Well, that could be because as soon as the fire broke out, the only thing containing it were a few fire doors and walls that didn't stand a chance against the initial shockwaves from the blast. So far, since the source is unidentified, prosecutors haven't found a single person to hold accountable. Still, despite the injuries, no deaths were reported. On December 2nd, 2016, a small fire turned the second floor of an Oakland warehouse into an oven. Within minutes, smoke began filling the low, cluttered party space where about 80 to 100 people were attending an unlicensed electronic music show. Since the floor was dim and the music loud, guests initially only noticed a strange smell, but before anyone could react, the lights cut out, visibility dropped to zero, and breathing became sharply difficult. Reports we looked into show that at the time, most of the crowd panickingly pushed towards the only main way out, a wooden staircase that led to the ground floor. But since the stairway was just an open makeshift structure built from pallets, it was directly above the fire. So when the blaze grew below, hot, toxic smoke rushed up those steps first, turning the only familiar exit into a chimney. People at the front of the line met a wall of heat and darkness, prompting them to push back, coughing and shouting. In desperation, many even dropped to their knees, trying to crawl under the smoke and feel their way towards any opening. Imagine getting shoved by a dozen panic kicks as you blindly tap the floor to find even the smallest hole to breathe through. Some partygoers managed to force their way to windows, prying them open and climbing onto whatever they could. Those who had somehow made it out squeezed through a tight gap in a fence gate to get to the street, only to see someone at the second floor window call for help and then jump when the heat and smoke became unbearable. Shortly after, when the fire crews arrived, they couldn't find a clear way in. The only access was a small door cut into a larger roll-up entrance, and behind it were an abundance of obstacles, stacked furniture, art pieces, partitions, and debris, forcing firefighters to crawl slowly through zero visibility. However, according to city records, Ghost Ship was never even meant to host crowds in the first place. That's because on paper it was only a 2-story industrial warehouse meant only for storage and light manufacturing. However, in reality, it had been transformed into a live work art collective, leading to the ground floor being cluttered with furniture, pianos, wooden structures, art pieces, acting as fuel for the fire. Even the electrical system followed the same improvised pattern, with power distribution relying on a web of extension cords and hook connections. Everyone was aware that the arrangement was moments away from an electric spark, and later reports confirmed that it was indeed an electrical failure in a refrigerator that sparked the fire. All the red flags were ignored by the owners, who only cared about one thing: money. In the end, 36 people paid the price with their lives.